The horizon pulses with a rhythm that never sleeps. From the humming grids of megacities to the satellites tracing silent arcs in the void, the modern world stands as a monument to a man history chose to forget. Deep within a shadowed room at the New Yorker hotel, rain streaks against the glass like tears on a cold lens. Nikola Tesla sits in the dim light, his thin frame motionless. His eyes are fixed on the city grid, watching the glow that owes its existence entirely to his own mind. He leans forward, the floorboards creaking under his weight, and whispers to the shadows, "The modern world runs on my ideas, yet most people barely know my name. Outside, the city thrives, oblivious to the architect of its brilliance." He touches the cold window pane, tracing the path of a raindrop as it bisects the distant, electric glow. He does not reach for the light. He only watches it, a ghost in the machine he gave to us, witnessing a future he built but never truly inhabited. The silence of the room deepens, punctuated only by the distant thrum of the city he electrified. The memory of the hotel room dissolves into the jagged violet fractures of a Balkan sky. Thunder rolls across the mountain peaks, shaking the stones beneath his feet. While the village children scramble for cover, young Tesla stands motionless on the ridge. He watches the lightning carve the darkness into glowing, impossible geometry. He memorizes the frequency of the discharge, counting the seconds between the flash and the roar, capturing the rhythm of the universe in his mind. He does not fear the strike. He studies the potential. He closes his eyes and the storm continues behind his eyelids. He begins to assemble the components, building complex engines of pure thought in the silence of his skull, rotating gears of energy that exist only in his imagination. He constructs circuits that bridge the gap between the static air and the ground, refining every connection until the mental model hums with perfect, invisible power. He is a stranger to the boys in the valley, a quiet figure standing in the rain, serving as a vessel for currents he cannot yet name, waiting for the day he can bring the lightning down to earth. The memory of the storm fades into the harsh, iron-gray light of a New York morning. The year is 1884. Tesla steps onto the docks, his boots crunching on grit and coal dust. He carries nothing but a book of poetry and 4 cents in his pocket. Around him, the city is a cacophony of steam whistles, clattering hooves, and shouting laborers. He stands still while the crowd surges past, his eyes scanning the skyline, not for shelter, but for the potential of the grid. He finds the office of Thomas Edison, a space smelling of cigar smoke and ink. Edison sits behind a heavy desk, his attention fixed on a ledger, barely glancing up as the visitor approaches. Tesla begins to speak of alternating currents, of long-distance transmission, of a world woven together by invisible threads. Edison taps his pen against the desk, his jaw set in a line of indifference. He sees only the immediate return on investment, the cost of copper, and the reliability of the direct current systems already in place. The air in the room thickens with the unspoken friction of 2 opposing forces. Edison dismisses the concept with a single wave of his hand. Tesla stands his ground, his silence sharp and deliberate, marking the moment the future began to fracture. Tesla retreated to a subterranean basement, a space where the air hung heavy with dampness and the scent of ozone. He worked through the dead of night, the only light provided by the flickering glow of his experimental tubes. His hands grew raw, his skin mapped with small burns from the soldering iron, yet he did not stop. He calculated complex equations on the soot-stained walls, refining the flow of alternating currents. Above ground, the narrative shifted. Edison's campaign against him grew loud and biting. In the newspapers and trade halls, Edison labeled the alternating current a phantom, a dangerous, unstable force that threatened the safety of the public. He mocked Tesla's vision as the fever dream of a theorist. Tesla heard the whispers but offered no public retort. He retreated further into his work, his focus narrowing until only the frequency of the current mattered. The mockery did not break him. It acted as a whetstone. Every insult, every dismissal sharpened his resolve. He stood at his drafting table, his back rigid, his breathing steady. The air in the basement felt charged, humming with the static of a brewing storm. The war of electricity had moved from a quiet disagreement to a total collision, and Tesla was ready to strike back. The exhibition hall went silent as the copper coils began to hum. Tesla walked to the center of the stage, his movements precise and calm. He stepped into a cage of iron bars, the air around him ionizing into a sharp, metallic tang. With a flick of a switch, the room erupted. Millions of volts surged through the transformers, transforming the dark space into a web of violet fire. The crowd recoiled, hands pressed to their mouths, expecting an explosion. Instead, they saw Tesla reach out. He extended a finger toward the crackling arcs, and the lightning bent to meet his touch, dancing harmlessly between his fingertips like a tamed beast. He did not flinch. He traced the jagged paths of the discharge, commanding the wild energy to pulse in rhythm with his own steady breath. The fear in the room dissolved into absolute stillness. He was no longer a theorist in a basement. He was a conduit, a master of the very forces he had been ridiculed for harnessing. He turned his gaze toward the spectators, his expression unreadable, and held the glowing tendrils of current in his palm. Every flicker of the blue light served as a silent, undeniable proof. The phantom current was real, it was controlled, and it was entirely under his command. The triumph in the exhibition hall rippled outward like a shockwave. Within months, the static blueprints of the laboratory transformed into iron and copper reality. Streets that had slept in shadows for centuries began to pulse with a new, artificial heartbeat. In city after city, the switch was thrown, and the darkness retreated, pushed back by the steady, brilliant glow of alternating current. Factories roared to life, their heavy machinery humming with a power that never tired. The grid extended its reach, climbing poles and spanning vast distances, stitching the continent together with invisible threads of energy. Tesla watched the maps of the nation change as reports of light flooded in from every corner. The skepticism that had defined his early years vanished, replaced by the relentless expansion of his invention. Yet, as the lights stabilized, his mind moved past the wires. He stood at his desk, peering not at the glowing lamps, but at the empty space between them. He envisioned a world where energy did not need the anchor of a cord. He saw the air itself becoming a highway for information and power, a silent, unseen network connecting every point on the globe. He had conquered the dark, but the true work of weaving the future had only just begun. Tesla turned his full focus to the cliffs of Long Island. He bought the land, cleared the brush, and began the foundation of a structure that defied all known engineering. The Wardenclyffe Tower rose like a skeletal finger pointed at the sky, a massive construction of timber and iron designed to tap into the very pulse of the earth. He moved through the site daily, measuring, calculating, and driving the crew to work double shifts under the biting coastal wind. He believed this monolith would make energy free, transmitting power through the atmosphere to any point on the planet. J.P. Morgan arrived by carriage to inspect the progress. He walked the perimeter, his eyes scanning the rising steel, calculating the cost per foot rather than the potential for human advancement. He asked about the meter, the billing system, and the profit margin for the wireless grid. Tesla pointed to the sky, speaking of resonance and global harmony, but Morgan only heard the silence of an empty ledger. The investment grew, but so did the pressure. Tesla poured his own remaining funds into the iron veins of the tower, convinced that once the system hummed, the world would finally understand. He was building a bridge to the future, unaware that the foundation was already cracking under the weight of greed. The telegram arrived at dawn. It was brief, cold, and final. Morgan had withdrawn his support, citing the lack of commercial viability. The construction crew stopped mid-weld, their tools dropping into the dirt with a hollow metallic clang. Then came the heavy machinery, a massive iron ball swung on a crane, hovering over the skeletal frame of the tower. Tesla stood at the edge of the property, his hands gripped tight against a wooden fence as the first strike hit the main support beam. The sound was a jagged, piercing shriek of tearing metal that echoed across the island. The tower shuddered, its rigid geometry buckling under the force of the impact. Bolts sheared off like sparks, showering the ground. Piece by piece, the monolith that was meant to unite the world tilted and surrendered to gravity. Steel beams groaned, twisted, and crashed into the earth, sending up clouds of choking dust. The wireless future was being dismantled in real time, hammered into scrap for the value of the raw metal. Tesla did not look away. He watched the final pinnacle of his life's work fold into the dirt, his dreams silenced by the steady, rhythmic thud of the wrecking ball. The horizon was empty once more. The silence that followed the demolition was heavier than the noise. Tesla left the ruins behind, retreating into the sprawling, indifferent maze of the city. Years bled into one another, marked only by the slow accumulation of dust in a corner room at the New Yorker hotel. He became a fixture of the local park, a figure who sat for hours with gray birds gathering at his feet. They were his only guests. He scattered grain, watching the frantic movement of wings, his hands thin and steady. Back in his room, the walls were lined with stacks of unpaid bills, ignored in favor of the rolls of parchment spread across his drafting table. He spent his nights refining designs for machines that did not yet exist, sketching circuits for energy that the world had not yet learned to harvest. Outside his window, the city pulsed with the steady hum of alternating current, lights flickering across every street, feeding off the invisible lines he had mapped decades earlier. He lived in the shadow of his own success, a guest in a home built by his own hands. He wrote equations in the margins of napkins, his mind still racing through the mechanics of the future, while the world downstairs moved on, unaware of the man who had given it the light. The room eventually fell quiet, but the current he unleashed never stopped flowing. Beyond those final, solitary walls, the world expanded into a vast, interconnected machine. Today, the horizon glows with a pulse that never sleeps. A camera lens pulls back, sweeping over the megacities where millions of lights flicker in perfect synchronization. Every smartphone screen ignites in a crowded train, every electric engine whirs to life on a silent highway, and every signal beamed into the void from orbiting satellites carries his signature. His fingerprints are on the foundational architecture of the modern era. The hum of the power grid is the heartbeat of a civilization he defined but could not inhabit. He remains a ghost in the machine, an invisible architect whose blueprints now sustain the daily breath of billions. From the depths of history, his ideas have become the atmosphere of the present, woven into the very fabric of human progress. He gave us the lightning, he gave us the connection, and he gave us the future. Nikola Tesla remains the unseen pulse of the modern world, the genius who electrified the globe and forever changed the way humanity reaches into the dark.